know that feeling when someone keeps helping, but it actually just makes everything harder? And suddenly there's this running commentary about what you should be doing instead, because it comes from someone who knows exactly what they're talking about. And that person is your mother-in-law. She's been there, she's done it, and she's convinced that her way still works, even though the world, motherhood, medical advice, and so much more has completely changed since then. Today, we're talking about the hidden cost of that dynamic, when the person who's meant to help ends up feeling like they're making your job even harder. And also, believe it or not, there are stories where the mother-in-law relationship actually does the opposite and is supportive and nurturing. This episode is all about the mother-in-law-daughter dynamic. Welcome to the Mama Circle podcast with me, your host, Natalie K. Martin, but please call me Nat. As moms, we know that motherhood is full of magic, but it also comes with hidden costs that honestly we were just not prepared for. The exhaustion, the mental load, the money squeeze, the way our relationships and sense of self get stretched so thin that they almost break. I call this the motherhood debt, and this podcast is a safe, judgment and shame-free zone where we talk about it all. I'm going to be bringing you personal stories, conversations with other moms, and practical tools to help you feel less alone and more supported as you go along this wild roller coaster ride of motherhood. So whether you're joining me on your 2 a.m. night feed, out and about running errands, or cooking dinner for your family, I want you to know that you are doing big and important work. And in case nobody has told you this today, you've got this. So if you're ready, let's jump in. So hello, my lovelies. Welcome to another episode of the Mama Circle podcast. If you are returning, nice to have you back. If you're brand new, hello and welcome. Nice to have you here. So it's a bit of a stereotype, this topic, the mother-in-law and the tension that can come up when you suddenly have introduced a grandchild into the family dynamic. And look, I think it's a stereotype because it's something that so many people experience. And so I actually am going back to the Reddit format for this, which I've really enjoyed sharing in previous episodes. And I think the reason why I love Reddit and sharing these Reddit threads is because it's really raw and it's really honest and it's a very real look at what people are going through. And I think that it can help just to kind of like open up the conversation in a way that you might not be able to otherwise. So I've got a really, really juicy Reddit thread. I'm going to start it. It's called MIL, so mother-in-law, and solicited parenting advice in quotation marks. Wow, where do I start? So about 3 months ago, my mother-in-law decided to pick up and move her entire life to Oregon to be closer to my husband and I. We've just had a baby, so this was a driving factor. On multiple occasions, she told us that she wanted to move here to help take care of our baby. I had significant concerns as she's quite a challenging woman to say the least. She spent a year taking care of my sister-in-law's kids only to destroy that relationship entirely. Now her plan was to move on to us. I told my husband this was a recipe for disaster, but he insisted that she's well-meaning and wouldn't do to us what she did to his sister. I said, we'll give it a chance. She was going to take care of our son in our home 5 days per week while we worked, and we'd see how it went. Fast forward, it's been an absolute nightmare. Even worse than I originally thought. She's constantly providing unsolicited advice, in quotation marks, that are just veiled jabs and criticisms on how I parent my son. She's told me he's freezing and we don't dress him appropriately. He needs blanket when he sleeps. In brackets, apparently safe sleep isn't a thing to her. We need to add rice to his bottles. We need to transition him to his crib now, etc. The list goes on. She only says this to me, not my husband. Furthermore, she doesn't respect our safety practices. For example, she puts blankets on him when he sleeps, when we've asked politely not to. She lets him sleep on the couch or in his bouncer instead of in his crib, or pack and play, and some other things along the same lines. Yesterday, she really crossed the line. She told me that I'm underfeeding him and he needs 6-ounce bottles, not 5-ounce. She said that it's not right to deprive him of food and that she knows what he needs. I've told her repeatedly that I've had milk supply issues since going back to work. 5 ounces was all I had at the moment. She then said that other breastfeeding women make it work, so I need to do it too. Boom, done. Oof. I left the room and my husband, who unfortunately overheard the exchange, kicked her out of the house. Today, she comes over to talk, in quotation marks, and proceeds to tell me that all of this is my fault because I'm too sensitive. I also apparently make her feel uncomfortable. She took zero accountability for her actions, and so we've decided to let her go as our childcare provider. Am I somehow in the wrong here? Also, how do I maintain a relationship with this person who clearly doesn't respect me? I want my son to have a relationship with his grandmother, but I really can't deal with this woman. Any advice is welcome. Oh, yeah. I don't know if I'm alone here, but there are like so many, like I can feel it in my body. It's like the hackles are rising on my skin reading that, because there's so many layers. There's so many layers to what's going on here. So there's the safety layer and, you know, like the advice that we're being given these days. There's also the layer of mother to mother. There's the layer of, you know, this being the mother of your partner. There's so much going on. It's so interesting to me that we very rarely hear about this problem from the opposite side, from like the overbearing mother-in-law from the dad's perspective. And it's not to say that doesn't happen, it absolutely does, but it's something you hear about less and less. And I don't know if that's just because maybe men tend to complain less publicly about things like that, but I think it's a real stereotype, and it's something that I think happens quite commonly. And I guess there's also you know, that stereotype of boy mums in particular that are somehow the problem. And I'm a mum to a boy, and I already know, I'm like, I am not going to be one of these mums. Like, this is something that I've got in my mind very clearly. I know how I'm not going to be as a mum to Jackson, and as a potential grandmother to any children that he might have. First of all, my personal thinking on this story that this woman has written in, it's not a story, it's her life. First of all, I think, like with so many things, it comes down to boundaries. And when a baby is introduced into a family, it's a really joyous event, right? It's just, babies have the power to just bring people together, and, you know, there's excitement, and a lot of people just want to spend time with that baby. And I think that in general, we need to be better with having boundaries and saying to people, actually, I don't want to have that many people around. I want to, for the first 2 or 3 weeks of my baby's life, I don't want to have visitors, or I don't want to have to travel very far. If I think about the first Reddit episode that I shared with you guys, you know, I think that we just have such a bad job in general, I think, of having boundaries as women, because we are told that we should be giving people what they want and saying no is wrong, etc., etc., etc. So I think, like, everything that I'm hearing when I read this post, it's like the foundation is boundaries and being able to hold those boundaries, which of course sounds good on paper, but it's really difficult when you're talking about family. And I think it's even more difficult if you're talking about your partner's family, because they are your family, but they're also not. And you might not feel that you can lay down the boundaries with the same intensity as you might be able to do with your own family. So I think that boundaries is probably the biggest reason as to why these conflicts happen. And something that I'm going to say now, in case I forget it later, is there's a part of me that wonders if the kind of quote unquote overbearing mother-in-law who wants to kind of come in and take over and mother your baby, I wonder if that happens so often because it's kind of seen as like a second chance, you know. So even if your partner's had like got 4 sisters or 4 brothers or whatever, it's seen as like another shot at motherhood. Having gone through the process and now your children are grown, and maybe also having looked back and thought, well, I would do that differently, or I would want to be this kind of mother, or like there's a part of me that wonders if that's a reason why so many mothers-in-law kind of elbow their way in and almost take over. It's something that you hear about quite a lot, this feeling of like they just come and swoop the baby up and take them off, and it feels like they're taking the baby away. And I wonder if there's a kind of like a feeling of being able to have a do-over. But back to this Reddit post. First of all, boundaries, but also like your intuition. She said in the very beginning, she had her significant concerns based on what she'd seen happen with her sister-in-law, and that she was quite a challenging person. And I think that this is one of those instances where we often know what's best. We might not know everything to 100%, but we have a feeling. We might think to ourselves, I don't think this is going to end well, and it hasn't. It's been an absolute nightmare, as she said. And I do understand that there is the lure of, there's someone who is family, is close family, who is willing to step in and provide childcare so that you could go to work, like taking care of your child 5 days a week so that you can work in your own home is golden, especially if you're living, somewhere like the States where the cost of childcare is really, really expensive. So I can understand that there was, probably a kind of feeling of pressure of, but look at how much money we could save. And not only that, my son's not going to be in childcare with some random people. He's going to be with his grandmother. And, maybe that helps to build a beautiful relationship between them. And all those things are good on paper. But the reality is often something different. And I think very often when we feel those like internal red flags, it's because we know. And, obviously she's not in a vacuum. She has her partner as well. And the added complexity that it's her partner's mum. But again, it's that thing of boundaries and, like the mother-in-law just deciding to pick up her entire life and move it is a really big thing. And I know people do that, and I think it's a wonderful thing that some people do that. But my mind is like, well, where was the discussion about this? And did it have to be such an immediate big move? Like, couldn't it have been that we'd say, why don't you come and stay with us for 2 or 3 months and we trial it and see how it goes, instead of packing up your entire life? Like, that is huge, and it puts a lot of pressure on the whole situation. Like, if it doesn't work out, then, which they've done, they've kicked her out of the house. Like, where's she going to go now? She's packed up her entire life and moved states. So I think we need to get better at holding our boundaries, but we also need to get better at listening to our intuition, because oftentimes we know when there's an issue in a relationship. And I do appreciate that means potentially having a bit of a difficult conversation with the partner, but there's a part of me that thinks it's pretty naive for her partner to have looked at what happened to his sister and think that somehow that wasn't going to happen to them as well. Like, if someone shows you who they are and how they act, then you should really believe that. And of course you can, give people chances and hope that they prove you wrong. But, if you have a brother who is a gambling addict and who has, stayed with tons of family members and sold their belongings so that they could pay for their gambling addiction or whatever it might be, it's probably going to be a bit naive to think that they're going to come and stay with you and not do that. So separating the dream, the illusion, it could be so good. She's going to come, she's going to take care of him. We don't have to put him in daycare. We don't have to spend any money for it. But looking at the reality of, okay, she's already done that once, and we can see how that played out. And then the things that she's doing that are potentially unsafe, letting him sleep with blankets and things like this. And this is something that I feel like we kind of have a bit of a duty to not educate the generation before us, the grandparents in this scenario, but just to let them know that things have changed. Because, we have to think about it, obviously depending on your age, like it could be like 20, 30, 40 years since they've done this. If your partner is an only child and they're 45 years old when you have your first child, then it's been 45 years, 43 years maybe, since they've had to change diaper, since they've had to put a baby to bed. And I think we have to realize that like things have come on in leaps and bounds since then. And so it's a bit naive to expect that someone who has not, potentially hasn't had really any dealings with like babies and toddlers for decades to just know how to do things and to know that things have changed. Because let's face it, before you had a child, you probably didn't know also that, you know, they should not sleep with a blanket and they should sleep with a sleeping bag. They should sleep on their back and not on their tummy, etc. And probably once you've done that and you've moved through that, you're not keeping up with that same advice of like how to put a newborn to sleep. So things have changed quite significantly since that generation. And I think that, you know, with a lot of things, we should be saying to them, actually, like, this is the updated advice now. You know, he should be sleeping on his back with a sleep sack and no blankets, etc. Which I know that she's said that they've politely asked her to do that. But I think in general, like we have to, I think, make sure that we are being proactive and not expecting that the grandparents in this scenario are going out of their way to relearn how to do things, because they're probably not. And the way that we parent has changed. I think there was something that I've heard about the baby boomer generation, so the generation that our parents, most of our parents are from, that they were encouraged to wake their baby up every 4 hours, I think it was, or something, to feed them, or, you know, like you would put them outside for a certain amount of time during the day to like build up their immune system and all these things. Like, the world has just moved on, and I think that we can perhaps have a little bit of grace in understanding that they are having to learn new things. So we're having to learn new things as well, but we're learning them fresh, right? Like, I didn't have a baby before. I didn't know half of this stuff. Now I know it because I learned it. But when it comes my turn to be a grandparent, if it comes my turn to be a grandparent, I have to recognize that I have to unlearn the things that I learned, if that makes sense. Like, you should also be able to say, we don't want to feed our child sugar, we don't want to give our child screens, whatever it might be. But also, you know, for the things that are really, really important, like, you know, protecting your baby from sudden infant death syndrome, like, those are just medical facts now, in the same way that you know, people from our grandparents' generation probably didn't think that smoking was all that bad. And, you know, it was advertised everywhere. And now it's like, we know how bad tobacco is and how dangerous it is and how we don't smoke around young children. Having said all that, it sounds like she has really, or they have really asked very politely for this mother-in-law to not let him sleep in blankets and to make sure that he sleeps in cribs. For me, those things are like non-negotiables. And I don't think that it's a wrong thing for anybody, any mother, any father, anybody, to just step in and cut off that behaviour, because we're talking about the safety of our children here. And yes, the need to people please might be strong, or at the end of the day, like, it's a question of safety for your child. And for me personally, I would have zero issue in saying, if you do that again, you don't spend any time with our kid. And that's it. It's like there is no in between, because there's a lot of things that you can undo, right? It could be that she let him sit in front of a screen for a half an hour, or she gave him some sweets, or whatever it might be. That's stuff that you can undo. That's stuff that's probably not going to be great for him for that moment in time, but it's not going to end his life, potentially. Sleeping in blankets before you're old enough to sleep in blankets, that's like life or death, potentially. And there is no coming back from that. And so it's the same as, you know, if you know that you're going somewhere with a pool in the backyard and your child doesn't know how to swim, or even if they do know how to swim, like, making sure that children are never unsupervised around water. Like, for me, it would be a massive red flag for someone to not take that seriously, because it's like there is no going back if the worst should happen there. And so I think that when it comes to those kinds of things, we have to be okay with feeling uncomfortable, and to just, like, that is a hard no, like, that is the boundary, and there's no discussion about it. And I think it's difficult with this generation that we're dealing with because they are particularly stubborn. I think boomers have a real reputation for being extremely stoic, extremely stubborn. And I mean, look, I get it, right? If you look at generationally what they had to deal with growing up, you know, what their parents were exposed to in the world. We're talking about children who were born post-war, the level of trauma that some of them might have been brought up around, or the conditions that they might have lived in. And also there was just not a lot of like mollycoddling, you know, it was like life is hard. There was no heating, no central heating for a long time, toilets outside, like all these things that can make a person really sturdy. And I think that it's a bit of a challenge for us to then be dealing with that generation as potential caregivers to our children, because, you know, it's that, well, you turned out fine. It's like, well, you had sugar, I had sugar when I was a baby, I gave sugar to you and you turned out fine. And it's this, you turned out fine. And it's like, well, actually, perhaps I didn't turn out all that fine. Perhaps that's the reason why I'm sitting in therapy right now. But also this, you turned out fine, it's according to whom? You know, like if you're judging you turned out fine by standards in 1972, for example, that is a very different kind of fine to what we're dealing with in 2025 and the world that we're living in, and the things that we understand now about brain development and emotional regulation and nervous systems and all the rest of it. So I think it's difficult when we're dealing with a generation that typically doesn't understand that and stereotypically are not that interested in learning about it, going to therapy, embracing some of the changes that have developed over the last 30, 40 plus years. So I think that it can be really challenging, but at the end of the day, we still have to be able to have agency as parents and to have the feeling that our children are safe, and to feel like we can trust the people who we're leaving our children with. We don't typically think about these things when we go to, when we take our kids to daycare and we know they're going to have a nap. We don't typically think about, well, are they sleeping under blankets? Are they sleeping with teddy bears around them? Because guess what? They're not. There is training that's been given to those people. They have a duty of care to do things according to the best practices. And I think that we need to feel that same way about our private caregivers. Having said that, I do think that we need to make sure that we're not micromanaging. And, it's kind of like the mental load episode that I shared. I think it was episode 48, which, it was kind of like once you've delegated something to someone and obviously making sure that it's all, they know what they're doing, they know what the boundaries are, they know that it's safe. We then should be able to just leave them to do things how they want to, as long as it's not endangering your child. Because micromanaging, nobody likes that. There is not one person on this planet who likes to be micromanaged. And also, the way that we do things isn't always right. It's the way that we do them. So the way that I sit and read a bedtime story to my son is very different to the way that his grandma does it. And that's okay. Like, I don't need to sit and, read the same way that she does, or vice versa. Or I was at a friend's house yesterday, or we were at a friend's house yesterday, and they've also got a little boy, same age as Jackson. And the boys were like rolling from the back of the sofa down the sofa, and the dad was there making sure that nothing's happening to them. But I was kind of like thinking, oh my God, at first, like, geez, like, please don't fall, don't hurt yourself, and ooh. And then I was like, okay, it's not the kind of play that I would do, but that's okay. Like, children need different input from different people. They need to know that there is more than one way of doing things, and that it doesn't mean that one person is right and one person's wrong. Obviously, a big caveat there is safety, because we need to make sure that our children are safe. But once we know that, like, If your mom wants to feed him milk rice pudding in English, and you would rather just give, like plain rice, doesn't really matter, does it? I would argue not. Obviously, it depends if there's a heap of sugar in the rice pudding. But yeah, so I think that we do need to make sure that we're not micromanaging. I think in this instance, and particularly the incident where she ended up getting kicked out, this thing about breastfeeding women making it work. I think what we're getting into there, when it reaches that level, it's insults. It's not, I think this is what's best for a baby, which is irrelevant because it's not their baby. And it's nice that they care enough to want to have that level of interest, but at the end of the day, it's not their baby. But I think that when it gets into the realms of insults, and this kind of, everybody else can do it, so why can't you? That you're kind of failing somehow for not being able to breastfeed, or not having a child who sleeps through the night when every other child that they ever came across slept through the night from the age of 6 months or whatever it was. Like, when it gets to that point, it's not about your child anymore. It's about you. It's about you as an individual, and you're not talking about an overbearing mother-in-law who wants to take over and knows what's best. It's now coming down to the dynamics of your relationship. In the best case scenario, your relationship with your mother-in-law would be thriving. It would be like having a second mom. That's, what it is. It's a mother-in-law. It's a second mom. But I think that for many, it's a very, very fraught relationship. And I think that's because for a lot of mothers-in-law, there is a fear of being replaced. There's a fear of being irrelevant. And I think especially when children come in, it adds an extra layer, because now their child, their son, has a family of their own. And that's like a further detachment, a further breaking away from their original nest. And I can imagine that must be really difficult to deal with, especially if they're an only child, or if a partner doesn't have very many siblings. I can imagine that's a really difficult thing to deal with. And if I think about the moments so far where I've had to let Jackson go already, the first time he went to nursery and, I'm not the only caregiver anymore. Or, the first time that I left him, which literally just a couple of weeks ago, left him at friends of ours, and it was for about an hour. And they very, very gracefully asked if I wanted to leave him there to play with their kids and I could come home. They live across the road pretty much. And I could come home and get dinner on. And I took the chance, of course, but it was like, oh my God, my baby's having a play date without me. This, it's a gaining of independence. It's an extra step. When they start walking, they don't need to be held by you anymore. That's also a letting go. I can imagine when they go to school, when they get their first girlfriend or boyfriend, when they go traveling, when they move out, when they meet someone who they're serious about, when they maybe get married. It's like an extra detachment. It's like losing a part of yourself, because, your child is a part of who you are. And I can imagine that for some mums, it can be really, really difficult. And maybe it feels like it's the final detachment from them, because up until then, they've always been theirs. They could still perhaps command time together, still have that kind of one-on-one mom-son time. But when they've got their own child, they know how much work it is to keep a family going. But it's like they are now off and they're their own little unit, and there's a lot less space for the mother-in-law. So I think that when it starts to get into jabs and veiled insults, it's about the dynamic between the two of you. And obviously, how you deal with this dynamic is going to be so individual. I think in the best case, it would just be, something that you wouldn't have to deal with. But I think maybe acknowledging for yourself that could be what's going on, that maybe this is, someone who is grieving and who is scared about her place in her son's life and doesn't know how to deal with that, because, as I said, the boomer generation are not exactly known for knowing how to handle and regulate their feelings and share their feelings and so on. Not all, but many. And so I think that, first of all, for ourselves, for you, for ourselves, becoming aware that, okay, this is maybe something that's happening here. What you choose to do with it is completely up to you. It could be that you just really don't like each other, and this is someone who you would never have any dealings with if you were not, partnered with their child. And that's okay. You don't have to like them as a person just because they're your partner's mom. Like, we don't get to choose our family, and you certainly don't get to choose your partner's family. But it could be that, depending on how that person is, that maybe you raise that topic with them. Maybe it's that you find ways to integrate her without, inviting her necessarily to come and live with you. But there's a myriad ways that you could do this. But I think it's an interesting perspective to think about, that it might not be meanness. It might not be that like wicked, evil mother-in-law who just wants to push you out and can't stand the sight of you and all the rest of it. Like, I think it is worth thinking about the fact that it could be that they just are really scared about losing their child. And, the more involved they are in your child, in their grandchild's life, the more that they're cemented into your family unit. And I think maybe this is especially something to think about for the mothers-in-law who are widowed or separated, single, because if they don't have that companionship, or if they don't have a particularly strong group of friends, and obviously the older people get, people start dying and getting sick, and you're faced with your own mortality and things like that. And I think that especially in those cases, like, I can imagine that cementing yourself really firmly in the lives of your children, and therefore your grandchildren, means that you will always have a place. You will always be important to somebody. And, like, you were once the center of your child's world. Like, I am the center of Jackson's world right now, but I know that it's not always going to be like that. And as I said, I know what kind of mother-in-law I do not want to be. But I could imagine that if I was feeling lonely and, kind of feeling pushed to the side, and now he doesn't have much time because he's out working and traveling, and now he's met someone, and now he's having his own family, and like, how can I make sure that I'm still a part of my son's life? Let me pack up my whole life and move across the country maybe, or maybe even to a different country, and be a part of it. And, the strategy behind it is maybe not great. But I think the emotions behind it are probably very real. So I think that in this case, unfortunately, they've now had these massive arguments, and what's happened is they've had to kick this mum out, and she's no longer their childcare provider. And of course, that means they'll find someone else to do it, and they'll, childcare wise, they'll just get on with things. But there's also the fallout of, like, what does that mean for their relationship now? What does it mean for the familial connection? What does it mean for the connection between the mother-in-law and her son, for the grandma and their grandchild? But also, what does it mean for the couple, for the mom and the dad in this? Because I could imagine, it sounds like her partner was really, like, on it, and he's the one who kicked her out, and it sounds like he's not someone who's just kind of like, oh, but she doesn't mean to be like this, etc. It sounds like he's very switched on. But you could easily see how, in a different dynamic between the mom and the dad, between the couple, there could then come the blame game of, well, I knew this was going to happen. I tried to tell you. We'd seen what happened with your sister, etc., etc., etc. So it's not, I think when we kind of gloss over those boundaries, or we don't listen to our intuition, it kind of helps in the moment, and it can help us to feel like we're keeping the peace right now. But further along the line, it's like a what do you call it? Like a hose thing with a hole in it. Like, you can patch over the hole every now and again, but at some point the water's going to come out. So, is she in the wrong? Was she in the wrong? Absolutely not. I don't think so. But I think that the lesson here is boundaries, for sure. And she says, how do I maintain a relationship with this person who clearly doesn't respect me? I want my son to have a relationship with his grandmother, but I really can't deal with the woman. I think, personally, oftentimes we do have to put our foot down for people to respect us. It shouldn't be like that. In an ideal world, we would just be respected from the off. But I think it's, it is like that sometimes. Sometimes we have to say a very clear, no, I will not stand for this. And you never know, like this might be the thing that actually earns her respect from her mother-in-law. In your case, it could be that you saying, I absolutely do not want my child in front of any screens. If he comes to your house, please no screens. You put your foot down about it. You're a united front, you and your partner, if you have one. That might be something that actually earns you respect, as opposed to just not saying anything and kind of being a bit wishy-washy. Something that we did was, what was the issue? I can't remember what the issue was now, but there was something, I think flying, that was it. We flew with Jackson when he was just under 3 months old to London, so that he could meet his family, like my side of the family, they're all in London. And my mother-in-law had some thoughts about that. And it was extremely difficult conversation. I'll be very honest. It was not easy and it was not pleasant. But afterwards, because I'd done my research, like I spoke to the child doctor about it, I looked to see if it was even legal. Like I didn't know, could you fly with a baby? I had no idea. And then I went to her and I gave her the medical evidence that said it is fine to travel with a baby and this is how it works, etc., etc., etc. And I do think that earned a little bit of respect from her in that particular point, because it was me showing, like, I might not know what I'm doing all the time, but I take the time to learn about the things that I need to know about. I can do this. I am a capable person. Things that she knows, but maybe just had to be reminded of. So maybe for you, like sending a link to an article or whatever it might be, YouTube video, whatever it might be, of something official saying, this is the reason why we don't let babies sleep with blankets. And here's the evidence to back it up. It's something that, might take you an extra 5 minutes to find that piece of evidence, article, whatever it might be, but it is something that could potentially back you up a little bit in terms of what you're saying. And on top of that, she says she wants her son to have a relationship with his grandmother, but she can't deal with the woman. I personally don't think that she has to deal with this woman. I mean, she has to deal with her insofar as it's her mother-in-law, and there will be gatherings and so on where, they're going to be together. But you don't have to be best friends with your mother-in-law. You just don't. You don't have to go for lunches. You don't have to go for coffees. It can be that you drop your kid off, you have a pleasant exchange, and then you pick them up again. You don't have to be bosom buddies. And that should not have to stop the relationship between your child and your mother-in-law being there. In the same way that if you separate from your partner, and you then start co-parenting, or maybe your child goes to their dad's on the weekend, or whatever your arrangement is, they are in your life. That's not going to change, but you don't have to have an intense relationship with them. You can keep it pleasant, you can keep it nice, but you don't actually have to spend extra time with them just because you're bound together by your child. And I think that when we take the time to get really clear on what's important to us, what's important to me as an individual, as a mom, what's important to us as a unit, as a couple, what are the values of our family, what will we stand for, what won't we stand for. Doesn't matter whether it's screen time, sugar, racism, sexism, homophobia, we don't speak like that in our family. Whatever it is, we have to get really clear on what our boundaries are. Because once we're clear on those, we absolutely can communicate those to the people around us. And if those people around us choose not to accept our values. They don't have to agree. Your mother-in-law might, want to die on the hill of it's absolutely fine to let your baby sleep in a crib with, cuddly toys all over the place and bumpers around and a really thick, massive blanket. She might want to die on that hill, but if that's the hill they want to die on, they're going to die on it alone. Because the boundary is the boundary. And I think while saying that, we still love you in some cases. Your role is an important one. The grandmother's role is important. The grandfather's role is important. No one wants to take those things away, but this is how it is in our family. I would love to know if there is an update to this. I haven't read through the comments. I try not to read through the comments before I speak about it on here. But yeah, if you are in this kind of situation as well, I really, really feel for you, because it's not easy. And it's really difficult when it's not your own family. There is an extra layer in there, but hold to your boundaries, hold to your values, listen to your intuition, and don't feel like you have to people please. You do not have to people please. And like I said, there are some things that you just cannot come back from. And when it comes to the safety of our children, that is something that, it should not matter what the consequences are. It is just important that we are doing the things that we know are safe for our children and reducing the risk of injury or even death. And I want to also, just end all of that on a lighter note, because I also want to say that it can be really beautiful having a mother-in-law, and that those relationships do exist as well. A mother-in-law can be a gift as well. This is someone who has gone through mothering and hopefully done it well enough, because you are with their child. You're having a baby, you've started a family with their child. So you're hoping that, in the best case, they've done a really good job of raising a really stand-up human. And also the added bonus of them not being your mum, because for some people, you might have quite a difficult relationship with your own mum. And so having an extra mum can give you that mothered feeling without the tangled and the mess or the tension that you have in your relationship with your own mum. Or maybe your own mother died, and so having your mother-in-law can be a stand-in for that. So that that positive mother-in-law experience is there. And so I want to read out a couple of Reddit threads or Reddit posts that are celebrating mothers-in-law as well. I 100% won the mother-in-law lottery. She's honestly the greatest and has helped me so, so much. I don't think she will ever know just how much she has had such a positive impact on my life, and especially my experience as a new mum. She's incredibly helpful and respectful. She knows when to step in and help, and when to hold back and let me figure out things myself. She always respects the decision we make for our little one, and I feel completely at ease with her looking after the little one. I trust her completely. Another, my mother-in-law is my village. The help she has provided for us in general, but since becoming a parent, is immense. In the early days with my second baby, she was the person who I spent the most time with. We'd hang out, drink tea, and just chat, but she always took care of my kids with me, with in italics, which was the big difference. She's a saint and the matriarch of our family. And I think that is the point. That with is so important, because it's not someone coming in and saying, I know what to do and I can do it better than you. It's someone coming in and saying, I have experience that I think can really help you. Let's do this together. Let me be part of this family, instead of let me elbow my way in and tell you how to do it so I can be part of this family. So you might be in the absolute trenches with your mother-in-law, but it is possible to have a good relationship, whether that's from the off or whether it's something that you build over time. If you enjoyed this episode, please do hit follow, maybe click on the stars, give it a rating, and I would love, love, love to see you back here for the next episode. Have a great rest of your day.